So the title of my talk today is a Scalable Wallet Infrastructure on BSV. But it could easily be retitled as the restoration of the original Satoshi SPV design, which we believe is much more suitable for retail point of sale. So to kick off, I thought I'd start with a fun fact. Last year in the UK, traditional payment technology, or retail payment technology, processed approximately 22 billion transactions. And that's the UK alone. You can imagine it would be a comparable number in South Korea, larger for China, larger for the United States.
From the break.
Now, as a high-level description, a kind of traditional fiat point of sale, what do you see? You'll see a customer and a merchant. The merchant will normally have a payment terminal, which is connected to the internet, the Visa network, MasterCard, and then a customer with a kind of offline, low processing capacity device. The payer and pay devices normally have asymmetric functionality. One's a receive only, one's a pay only. So that's in the kind of fiat world. And again, just to reiterate the point, you'll see technology like this: offline card and an online merchant device. Now, SPVs, or Simplified Payment Verifications, cryptocurrency point of sale, currently look something a little bit more like this. So I don't know how many of you have ever paid for anything using crypto. I know that South Korea is actually one of the world's leaders in cryptocurrency payments. Apparently 35% of all cryptocurrency payments at the retail point of sale happen in South Korea. So you'll see something more like this, where the customer will have a device that needs to be connected to the internet, and the merchant will have a QR code, and normally behind that they'll also have a mobile phone or a desktop, something, in order to basically generate payment addresses, and then there'll be polling nodes that they're connected to, looking to see if they've been paid. Okay. So again, if we take the high-level description, the distinction between what you see in the fiat world and what you see in the cryptocurrency world at the moment is this symmetry in functionality between the customer and receiver wallets in general. Okay. So it's my contention that if you want to try and spread the adoption of cryptocurrency into the mainstream, you need to mimic the functionality, at least to start with, mimic the functionality the merchants have at the moment. So we believe that a design that would be able to get cryptocurrency more widely adopted would be something more like the traditional fiat payment design, where you have the asymmetric functionality between wallets or between devices, quote unquote, instead of the symmetric functionality that you often see today with cryptocurrency. So the question is, how can we mimic the traditional payment technology on Bitcoin? Go from something like this, where the customer has to be online, the merchant has to be online, both can pay and both can receive, to something like this, where the customer can be offline, the merchant has to be online, one is pay only, one is receive only. So, simplified payment verification, or Bitcoin wallets, have its own section in the Bitcoin whitepaper. So an SPV, as designed by Satoshi, was a type of what we call a lightweight client, or a type of client that only stores Bitcoin block headers. So, as you might all know, Bitcoin blocks are composed of two parts: a Bitcoin block header, which is a fixed 80 bytes, and then the transactions, which make up the vast bulk of the block. Now, no matter how large the block is, the block header remains the same. And the block header contains information that can be used to identify that block. Contained within the block header is a field called the hash merkle root. And the hash merkle root is, if you want, a kind of fingerprint of the transactions contained within the block. Okay? A merkle root is a name for the merkle tree. A merkle tree is a kind of data efficient, it's a data structure that allows for efficient checks of membership in a set. Okay, so if you're looking for a good design for retail point of sale wallets, or this design asymmetric functionality, you can look no further than the white paper itself. Low bandwidth method for confirming a payment only requires block headers and merkle paths. Okay, so let's take a closer look at how SPV is implemented today in a point of sale that you see in this picture. So here's our blockchain and the network. Bob has his symmetric device. Alice has her symmetric device. Okay, so step one. Bob will send a payment address to Alice, maybe through a QR code. The customer's wallet, so again, this is the current implementation. The customer's wallet will generate a transaction, sign the transaction, and send it to the network. Okay, so this is where the slight inefficiency happens. The merchant will need to query a number of nodes, looking for whether the address has been updated with new UTXOs. And this is actually a reasonably expensive operation. Now, if the merchant accepts what's called zero-conf, where the transaction is not yet in a block, then it will just look for how many nodes have seen and validated and propagated that transaction, or whether that UTXO is contained in a transaction. And if they want to wait for what's called a confirmation, they will ask for a Merkle proof, which allows them to verify whether the transaction has been included in the latest block, as you can see here. Okay, so that's what you see in the picture previously. And again, to hammer home the point about this check, it's very data efficient. A Merkle check is just a sequence of SHA-256 hash digests supplied with the transaction itself and the block header, which allows you to check membership. Okay. So, in this slide, I say we propose the low bandwidth SPV, or I should probably say the original Satoshi SPV allowed the following. The customer can be offline. The payee, the merchant, should be broadcasting their transactions, and the burden of verification should be on the merchant. So if we look again at the design of a system more suitable for point of sale, we'd have the following. The merchant, instead of just providing a payment address, would provide what's called a kind of payment destination or a transaction template for the merchant. This would be either through near-field communication, most likely near-field communication. The customer would complete the template, and this would include UTXOs that they have and are able to spend, but not just them, but the full transaction data themselves. The merchant can do what's called a local SPV check to check that the transactions that are funding, so the outputs that are funding the transaction, have actually been included in the block previously, so they actually are kind of, at least were valid at some point. The payee, the merchant, broadcasts the transaction,
I can't get rid of it.
And then searches for that transaction in the mempool of the nodes it's connected to. So this is where the efficiency saving is.
Yeah.
And of course, if they're waiting for a confirmation, if it's a large amount of cash that's being transferred, then they can obviously request a Merkle path for the next block to see if it's been included.
Is your X rated?
So in this system, there'd be a new type of SPV check, or let's say a kind of repetition of the SPV check. First, for the input transactions themselves, and then also, if you're waiting for one confirmation from the new transaction, then you do the check then. Okay, so a high-level description, we have two wallets here, right? One is for the customer, one is for the merchant. The customer wallet stores UTXOs, full input transactions, and Merkle paths, a copy of the block headers, of course, and can be in an offline state. So it's pay only at the point of sale. Of course, in order to update new UTXOs, the customer wallet should be able to connect to the internet at least intermittently. So not all the time, it doesn't need to be connected at the point of sale, but should be able to connect, as I said, from time to time in order to update the wallet with new data. So it should be able to download input transactions containing the UTXOs, new block headers, and so on and so forth. And again, on the other side of that point of sale would be the merchant wallet. So the merchant the merchant at the point of sale would only need to store public keys. It would need to be able to broadcast transactions to the network, so it would need to be connected to other nodes, and does not need to store private keys at the point of sale. And it's a receive-only device. Now, of course, you can't generate public keys without private keys, unless you don't want to be able to spend the transactions. Sorry, should I say first? This is what the kind of merchant will request: full transaction data, merkle pass UTXOs, and signed payment transactions. As I was saying here before, of course, you can't have public keys without private keys unless you want to burn the Bitcoin. So there would normally be in this kind of setup a master wallet that would have like the full functionality, and you could have multiple point of sale devices which are essentially fed public keys and enable this kind of customer merchant interaction at the point of sale. So what I've just described to you is going to be a high-level description. Of course, this has been packaged up. That was the kind of core high-level design. Many of you who are closer to the kind of activity in Bitcoin SV might have heard of BIP270, which is a protocol for communication between a merchant and a customer. And it's the kind of, let's say, the full description of this interaction. So the SPV design is essentially meant to feed into this. And on top of that, we are also kind of in the process of creating a merchant API that will enable merchants to directly communicate with nodes in order to get quotes on fees. And then we package that up with BIP270 to enable the kind of from start to finish, all the kind of data flows that happens there. Now, if I can just take a step through what's happening here, the merchant will first contact a miner or the node it's connected to getting a fee quote. So it'll be a miner. It'll be getting a fee quote, and this will create a fee market. If a miner is providing a lower fee rate, the merchant can connect to that miner and send transactions directly to them. Then the BIP270/merchant customer interaction can happen. And then from then on, the merchant is the one that broadcasts the finalized transaction. When it broadcasts the finalized transaction, it checks immediately with that node that it's been validated and it's in the mempool, and is expecting to see it in the next block, hopefully, or definitely in a block that will be coming up. Okay, so the talk was titled Scalable Wallet Infrastructure. How is this scalable? What I've described is just a kind of difference in the communication. Rather than the customer broadcasting, you have the merchant broadcasting. So you're probably wondering, what has this got to do with scalability? Well, the current design for SPV is not scalable. The network that it generates when you have several customers needing to be online all the time is that the wallet providers often end up having to run their own full nodes. They end up forced to in order to feed their customers real-time data. That slows down the rest of the network, especially if they have connectivity issues to other full nodes in the network. So instead of a system like this, where you have kind of multiple devices all connected to different nodes throughout the network, you'd want something like this, at least at the point of sale, where you have strong connections between receive-only devices, merchant devices, and kind of peer-to-peer communication at the point of sale. And then, of course, intermittently, you might have an update that would be kind of pay-only device or a payer device connecting to a full node, or even doing it through the merchant. But we'll take it step by step. OK, so I've got 1 minute left. I thought, so we presented this idea originally around March this year. And I thought, well, OK, I'll go away and try and get some data to back up my assertion here that it's more efficient. OK, so what I've done in actually the last few weeks is actually I've tried to measure the difference in time taken between the transaction propagation that occurs using the kind of current SPV model and that occurs if you were to use the kind of merchant SPV design. So just to kind of run through, imagine the kind of current SPV as implemented. Alice broadcasts a transaction paying Bob's address. Bob uses the remote procedure call list unspent to look for new UTXOs, can enter an address after list unspent to make sure that their UTXOs are filtered out. And the new method, or the original method, in which the payee broadcasts the transaction, and then searches for get transaction and mempool. Now I've run out of time. So preliminary results, and I stress that preliminary results suggest that there is a reasonable efficiency saving between the two. However, in my tests, I only created one merchant node. I intend to actually scale that up to make it more realistic, and hopefully you'll see a massive distinction between the implementation that you see currently and the implementation we hope to do, which would be more for a retail point of sale. All right, so final slide. Benefits. Customer can sign transactions offline, minimal connectivity required for the customer, and we believe that increases the ease of use. For the merchant, connectivity burden is on the merchant, but you could say that that's kind of merchant configurable risk, customizable transaction templates, and importantly, for the network, faster response times, fewer SPV connections per node. All right, thank you.